Hello, every one of you. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. And this is the Gracious Hope Live podcast. And we are here to bring you interesting topic or things to talk about regarding our country, Liberia. And it is a pleasure always to have you join us here on this podcast as we look at some of the happenings in our country, things that we believe we can look at and talk about and to see how best we can address the situation, that is, address it in a way that will bring peace and stability in our country. And if you're just joining us, my name is Pastor Red. I go by Pastor Red. I would like to say welcome once again to this podcast. And of course, we are here every Saturday, the same time, which is 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Central Time. And of course, for the Mountain Time is at 4 p.m. And so if you're joining us, we would like to say welcome right now as we're about to go in an important discussion about our country, Liberia. A lot of things to talk about. And I believe if you have interest or you will have interest in some of the things that we'll be talking about regarding our motherland, Liberia. It is interesting that we find a whole lot of things going on in our country, things that are germane to our national growth. And the more that we share our thoughts, the more that we share what is good for our country, we believe we can have a better country, a country of peace, a country of stability. And that does not mean that there will not be conflict. I mean, there will be conflict. That does not mean there will be no conflict. There will be always conflict here and there, but it will be to a point where we understand that, hey, with our country or with our unity or reconciliation, we cannot go anywhere as a country, or we cannot even sustain the developmental path that we are on right now. Things have changed in Liberia, a lot of changes, but those changes are things that I believe we can talk about on this podcast to see whether they help or they break our country. And so today, our topic is going to be on the Liberia National Police, okay? That is it. Liberia cannot police its way into moral health. Liberia cannot police its way into moral health. Now, I read that repeatedly so that it can get better in our minds because when we talk about police, we're talking about, oh, the serene is coming to arrest someone for wrongdoing. The police is there to make wrong right, and they enforce the law. Okay. Now, when we hear about serene, it's serene means something already went wrong. Nobody calls the police because a household raised an honest son or daughter. Nobody dials for help because a business pay its workers fairly or because a young officer or official refused a bribe on Tuesday afternoon in Banga City, Bone County. We only hear the sirens after the quieter failures have already had their say. And that's why the police get involved when something is going wrong. And so today on our podcast, we are going to talk about those quieter failures. So stay with me because it really matters today, okay? And as you stay with me here, we'll be right back. Get ready. We got a lot to discuss. All right, so we are back here, and hey, share this link with your friends, your families, and your group so that they can be a part of this podcast. Just give me some minutes here, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things. I am Alexander L. Ray, the host of Gracious Hope podcast, and I'm glad you took out this hour or this time to be with us wherever you are listening from. Maybe you are driving through a traffic near red light or Painesville area or anywhere, 72nd, or maybe downtown or Carwell or everywhere, anywhere you are late at this time at your end. Maybe you are folding your laundry or doing something. Or if you are in a diaspora, you could be in Minnesota, Rhode Island, New York City, and all of the major cities where you find the bulk of Liberians living or the heavy population. I would like to say, well, this podcast, you could listen, maybe play in the background if you're busy, listen. Maybe you are a pastor prepping a sermon and you needed something to think along. However, you got there, you got here because not by accident, but for something God has pretty much brought you to listen to. And I want you to lean in for the next 60 minutes because we are going to name something that most conversations about Liberia never quite reach. Okay. Now, here's where we're going to be heading today on this podcast. Okay. Let me just give you the background. Something breaks long before even the police sirens arrive. And by the time a young man or a young woman stands before a magistrate court in our capital city, or a market woman lacks her market stall early because thieves have been grown bold after dark, the true crisis already unfolded years earlier, quietly in places no uniformed police officer ever visits. We love to list our national troubles like separate charges on a bill. For example, corrupt officials, broken roads, empty classrooms, young people roaming around doing nothing, they are idle, a police force stretched too thin to protect anyone well in every community. Every one of those complaints is true. It is true. And I believe that. And not one of them by itself explains the ache underneath all of those complaints. So today on this podcast, we will carry a title that might sting a little on this first hearing, which is Liberia cannot police its way into moral health. And that's what we'll be talking about today. And you can comment as I go into this podcast to talk more about what I mean here. Now, I did not choose that title for today's podcast to insult our good police officers walking checkpoints in the heat, um, trying to question those who intend to do evil, or to dismiss the hardworking, funded work of law enforcement as a whole or as a policy. I chose to talk about this topic because I believe, as a pastor and as a Liberian and former Liberian journalist, that we all have been asking the wrong institution to do the work it was never built to do. And that is our national police. We keep expecting handcuffs to accomplish what only a formed or established conscience of the heart can accomplish. Over the next few minutes, we will move through 6 ideas together on this podcast. The first one is why treating symptoms of our problem convinces every one of us that it found a cure right up to the next crisis, which proves otherwise. Second, why laws on the books restrain the hand but cannot touch the heart. Third, Why new leaders so often carry old habits into the office, no matter how sincere the campaign promises sounded. Fourth, we'll be talking about why wealth without a conscience to guide it tends to enrich the already powerful people and leave everyone else further behind. Fifth, why handcuffs cannot heal a fractured household or plant conviction where none was developed in the first place. And finally, why rebuilding Liberia means rebuilding people first, family by family, classroom by classroom, congregation by congregation. And this will run into two segments on this podcast with a short break in between. So you have a time to breathe, refill your coffee or cup or whatever tea or you drinking, or just sit with what you are hearing on this podcast. So let's begin where every honest diagnosis has to begin. Okay, so then let us look at our situation or current situation and condition of our country with everything that is happening. And that is what I call the diagnosis beneath the diagnosis. Just ask a Liberian, what's wrong with the country? And you will usually get a list before you even get an answer. They will say corrupt officials, a police force stretched too thin, young men, young women roaming at every corner, from Monrovia to Bangor to Birmingham County to Buchanan, and a courtroom that moves slowly for the poor people than for the well-connected people. Every item on that list is real, and I am not here on this podcast to talk any of it down. Okay, because they are real situations and problems that we face on an individual level, on a family level, and on a societal level. But treat the symptoms long enough, and the nation can convince itself it found a cure right up to the next crisis proves otherwise. And we have seen that over and over, and I know it sounds familiar to you. When we think we find a solution to a certain problem, we just found the symptoms, and then we try to solve it superficially. It could be a news scandal that breaks, outrage fills social media, such as Facebook and the other platforms for perhaps a week. Right now, social media, we are talking about the drug crisis, cocaine seized, and investigations, and police officers involved or accused or under scrutiny or on an investigation, some dismissed, some suspended. We see on social media a commission gets formed or established to look into the process or into that particular situation. And then within a season, the same painful conversation starts all over the game wearing a different headline. We have seen that over and over. So then the question is, why does the circle keep repeating? Just try asking a different question than the one everyone is asking. Instead of who failed us this time, or who failed us in this administration or that administration, the right question to ask is what happens when institutions responsible for forming conscience quietly hand that work over to the police, hand that work over to the courts, hand that work over to the prison system? Just think about this clearly. A father in the home who never learned discipline from his own father cannot easily hand discipline to his son or daughter. That is a reality. He simply does not have it to give it. It's like to say, if you don't have love in your heart, you cannot give it to other people. You want to be faking. Just also like a student will copy her way through secondary learns long before graduation that appearances matter more than honesty, and she carries that lesson into whatever office she eventually occupies. A young clerk who watches his supervisor pocket public funds without a single consequence absorbs a lesson no civics textbook ever taught him, and he absorbs it far more thoroughly than anything he memorized for an exam. Now, none of those moments make the evening news or the afternoon news or the morning news. There's no serene from the police trying to figure it out, no arrest, no headlines. And yet, each of us or each one quietly moves responsibility away from the family, away from the classroom, away from the workplace, and hands it over to the police officer who was never trained to raise anyone, discipline anyone's conscience, or repair what years of neglect already broke. Do you see the shape of the problem now? We have been sending the ambulance to fix what only a hospital built years earlier and staffed with patient hands could ever have prevented. Now, our national conversation in our homeland, Liberia, tends to name this crisis as political, a matter of leadership failing to lead. Yeah, that is a usual pattern of saying or accusation or alleging. I understand the appeal of that explanation. It hands us a simple veiling and a simple fix. Remove the official when he's corrupt or when she's corrupt, and then the nation will heal. Vote differently in the next circle of election, and things will improve. That explanation is not wrong so much as it is incomplete. Beneath the political failures sits an economic reality where growth has never quite reached ordinary households in our country. And beneath that economic stream sets something ordered, something that touches every corner of Liberian life. And you know what is that? A struggle over national character itself. Corruption, unemployment, crime, weak law enforcement deserve to be named honestly as symptoms on the surface. But a deeper condition is moral, and it will not yield to a new administration, a new budget, or a new 5-year development plan on its own strength. And let me say this very clearly: what convictions sit underneath everything we will cover on this podcast today. This conversation is pastoral before it is political. Please understand that. Liberia does not suffer from a shortage of laws. Trust that it suffers from something else. We will not be saved by writing more laws in the books or extending the district for more representatives. What we suffer from is a shortage of formed or established conscience of the mind, of the will, and the emotions, the kind that only grows in the homes, the only kind that grows in the schools, in the workplaces, and houses of worship, willing to do patient, unglamorous work over the years rather than announcing solutions overnight. That kind of work has been neglected, sometimes by hardship and sometimes by plain choice. And our police have been left holding what the rest of the nation set down. No police badge was ever meant to carry that much weight alone. Not one. Now, let me be clear here. Hear me clearly on this next point, because I don't want anyone walking away from this podcast with the wrong idea. None of what I'm saying excuses corrupt leaders or officials, dishonest workers or employers, or violent offenders from responsibility for their own choices. I want you to please understand that. Every person carries the weight of their own conscience, and every person will answer for their own conscience before neighbors and before God. And that accountability is not optional. It will never be. You know why? Because a nation that keeps asking its police to fix what its own families, schools, workplaces, and congregations refuse to address is asking the wrong institution to do the right work. And that is why recovery would not be found only in better policing, though better policing matters and deserves real investment. Recovery will be found in a slower, deeper work of rebuilding the people who make up the nation, one household, one classroom, one conscience at a time. That's how the rebuilding should be. Now, let us move into our second idea. If you have a pen, you can grab a pen to be the kind of listener who writes and also allow his or her understanding on a paper to look at later, because this next session might reframe how you think about every law and every reform proposal you've ever supported. And so let us talk about laws that restrain people from doing evil, but let us also understand that those laws do not redeem the conscience or the attitude of the heart of the people. A law can tell a man or a woman what he may not do. A law cannot tell him or her who he ought to become. And that sentence carried the weight of everything I want to say in this particular session of the podcast. So let me repeat it slowly. A law restrains the hand. It was never designed to reach the human heart. Liberia has written good laws. We have rectified fair constitution. We have signed honorable regional and international commitments. And still, the nation keeps watching good legislation produce disappointing results. And you know why? Because legislation restrains the hand, but a nation that makes restraint for redemption will keep passing new laws while wondering why the old behavior persists underneath everything that is going wrong. And that is why, if we think about our various counties and cities and look at our rural road outside of every city, we may see a young officer waves to a truck driver through after a folded bill quietly changes hand. Okay? Now, no statute of law failed that morning, but you know why? A conscience did quietly long before that truck driver ever reached that checkpoint to that officer in some earlier season when nobody thought to teach that particular young officer or man otherwise. Was there a class that young man ship or skip? Was there the class he skipped that would have even stopped him in his tracks about bribery? No. There was a whole formation he never received at home, in school, in whatever congregation raised him, if any congregation raised him at all. So now, I want to be careful here because some of you are already bracing for an argument against the law itself. And that is not where I'm going. Every healthy society needs clear rules, consistent law enforcement, and courts willing to hold the powerful people accountable right alongside the poor people. And that is why, if you even look in the scripture, the prophet Micah's ancient call in chapter 6 of Micah, verse 8, he says to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. And that was never a call to abandon justice system. It was a call to let justice flow from something more durable than fear of punishment. Do you hear the difference? Now, fear of punishment produces compliance when someone is watching. An established or formed conscience produces integrity, whether anyone watching or not. And that is why a tempting shortcut says straight up penalties and more visible policing will eventually produce an honest society. Because we can see this from history. History keeps refusing to cooperate with that particular theory. And I say that as someone who has read enough of it to trust this pattern I'm talking about in history. Wherever conscience is absent, people learn to break rules more carefully than stop breaking them. The law becomes a game of avoidance instead of a shared moral commitment, a contest between those enforcing and those evading the law, rather than a common life held together by trust. That is a reality. Yes, it is a reality. Liberia needs laws that restrain wrong. Absolutely. But we need something else entirely to raise citizens who no longer want to do wrong in the first place. And that is why restraint through law enforcement manages the symptom, but the establishment or formation heals a cause, and that is a formation of our conscience. Those are not the same project, and no legislature, however well intentioned, can legislate the second one in existence. So now, watch how this same pattern I'm talking about shows up in daily politics. So we look at our leaders, new leaders, old habits. Every election season in Liberia arrives in genuine hope. People promise things, they will fix things. I have felt that hope myself more than once as a Liberian and as a Liberian journalist. Crowds gather, promises multiply. For a season, it feels as though a new administration might finally turn the page for good or the common good. Then, often enough, the same patterns resurface under different names. What are the different names? Patronage disguised as opportunity, favoritism disguised as loyalty, police officer or the police or the public office, that's what I meant to say, the public office treated as private reward rather than public trust. Voters are not naive to notice the pattern repeating itself. We have seen people speaking on that every time through social media, through phone calls with family members, or in person in conferences. And we can give them credit. Those who discuss those things, they are witnessing something structural and not accidental. Police and those that are part of the political system, yes, they need a reform. And the political reform changes who holds power far more easily than it changes what that power gets used for. So a nation can rotate through honest sounding candidates during the election campaign for decades and decades without ever touching the habits that make office so tempting to misuse in the first place. So here is a comfortable conclusion many of us reach for, myself included in weaker moments as well. Remove the corrupt official or individual, and the corruption will leave with that person. But does it really happen that way? It rarely does. You know why? Because the habits that produce him or her were formed long before he or she ran for that office. And those habits were formed where? In homes, schools, workplaces that never insisted on integrity when integrity actually cost something. A new leader raised inside the same untested conscience would eventually reach for the same shortcuts under enough pressure. Give it time. Give it a budget crisis or a family member asking for a favor or a contractor offering a gift, and watch what surfaces. But let me be clear here because I want to be clear that this is not fatalism I'm proposing or talking about here. Okay. This is an invitation to look upstream, which is exactly what good pastoral care and good public policy have in common. Liberia needs elections and it needs them to be free and credible. And that is very important. But democracy without moral formation is a vehicle with a fresh coat of paint and the same worn engine placed underneath. No ballot box alone can replace what only sustained character formation can build over years. You cannot vote your way into a formed or established conscience. You have to grow gradually, patiently, starting long before you ever run for any office or for anything. And so, if you are listening to me right now, understand that institutions such as our police, they are overstretched and thin, and they feel the burden. But we are coming up on our break in a few minutes here. But before we get to our break, let me leave you with a question to sit with you during that mini break of silence, okay? Or maybe something in between that I will play. If new leaders keep carrying old habits into office, what exactly were those habits formed? Hold that question in your mind. We'll pick it back up when we get back after this short break so that we can talk also about money, because Liberia's relationship with its own wealth tells this same story from an entirely different angle. So that will be our first half hour break here. Get ready, get some water. We'll be right back. Don't go away because we got more to talk about. All right. You are listening to the Gracious Hope Live Podcast. My name is Alexander L. Red, and we are back here to complete the second half of our podcast, which is entitled Liberia Cannot Police Its Way into Moral Health. And that is the topic that we are discussing today on this podcast. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, your families, and loved ones, and your groups. And we are here every Saturday. We are here every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, USA time. And so this is interesting for us to talk regarding our laws and everything else that will strengthen our nation. And again, welcome, and don't forget to share our link. Okay, so we are back here. Now, Before the break, I left you with a question. If new leaders keep carrying old habits into office, where were those habits formed? And keep that question close to your heart because it's going to run underneath everything we cover in this second segment of our podcast. We are moving now into wealth, into policing real limits, that is, police enforcement of the law. They have limits as well, and into what I believe rebuilding our country requirements. What are some of the things that we really need to take into consideration when we want to build our country, Liberia? So let's get into that, right? So let's talk about wealth without a conscience, okay? Liberia, our country, is not short on natural wealth. We got a lot of resources. We know that. We have seen a lot of concessions signed by foreign companies. We have never been short on natural wealth or resources. Rubber, iron ore, timber, and fertile land have drawn outside investors for generations. And national development plans keep promising inclusive growth for years, just ahead of all of us, always a few years ahead. But here is a distinction I need you to hold onto. Wealth generation and wealth distribution are not the same achievement. A nation can grow richer on paper while its people grow poorer in daily life. And both of those things can be true in the exact sense when it comes to the fiscal year. Just think about a concession of a company writing agreements that fills a national ledger with impressive numbers, while the community surrounding that particular county or community in our city and our community surrounding that very concession or contract that is signed with such company, still people in our community still walk miles for clean water. And some of the students there, they study by lantern light after dark. I have seen it. You have seen it. Or maybe you have seen it. The understanding here is that economic development pursued with ethical responsibility guiding that development tends to enrich those already positioned to benefit and leave everyone else further behind, leaving them with resentful feelings and eventually desperate enough to accept whatever survival requires of them. That desperation, by way, is exactly the soil where the corruption we complain about grows the best. We cannot separate the wealth conversation from the moral conversation. They have the same conversation, it's just that they are wearing different clothes. Now, it would be comforting to conclude that Liberia simply needs more foreign investment, more concessions, more contracts signed in their air-conditioned offices in the capital city, Monrovia. We acknowledge that because investment matters. And I won't pretend otherwise, and no honest voice should pretend. But money poured into a system without ethical guardrails tend to find the shortest path to the people who already hold power, leaving the farmers, the market women, and laborers to compete for whatever trickle down to them after everyone else has already taken that share. And that is why is a healthy economic system asks a moral question alongside every financial one. Who benefits? Who bears the cost? And who decided? Until that question gets answered as seriously as questions about profit margins and growth targets, we will keep discovering year after year that a rising economy and a rising nation are not automatically the same thing. One can happen without the other. And we have watched it happen without the other for decades in our country's history. So let me pause here and now speak pastorally for a moment. Please give me your ear. If you are listening to this podcast now and you work in business, you work in government, you work in an NGO, or even in your own small trading stall or office, I want you to ask yourself that same question this week. Who benefits from the way that you do business? Who bears the cost of your shortcuts? And who decided that this was acceptable? And that is why, if we look in the scripture, we see that scripture never treats economics as a morally neutral zone, and neither should we. So then the question becomes, what handcuffs can I heal? Ask any officer. They will tell you the burden that they bear. They have a lot on a plate to take care of that was never meant for them to do. What handcuffs can I heal must be understood in a way that the burdens that are placed on the officers in Morovia, it is something that wears them down. Just ask them whether violent criminals are the real problem. Just ask them. From my survey so far, rarely. It is the sheer volume of ordinary human brokenness that lands on their shoulders because nobody else stepped in earlier in those teenagers' life. They see, the police officers see a teenager with nowhere to sleep, a domestic dispute rooted in years of unaddressed anger that finally boiled over on a Tuesday night with a kid sleeping on the street of Morovia or any other city. A young man or the young woman selling phone cards at a checkpoint or somewhere else in the market area because no employer will ever take a chance on him or her. Police officers can arrest, they can detain, and refer all of these cases through the court system because that's how system is set up. But what the police officers cannot do is mend, MEND. The police officers cannot mend a fractured household. The police officer cannot restore a broken education or a plant convention where none was ever developed. So it goes back in the home. Our problem, our problems go back in the homes, in the schools, in the workplace, and we expect the police to take care of that. They were never equipped for that kind of work. They were never trained for that kind of a work. And honestly, it is unjust of us to keep expecting all of that from the police anyway. Now, the tempting response for many of us every single time is to call for more police officers, more patrol vehicles, more visible enforcement, and to treat public disorder as a staffing problem waiting on a bigger budget line. Increased policing can suppress a symptom for a season, and I want to acknowledge that clearly here because it does buy time. But you know why it cannot do? It cannot cure a cause of that poverty. When families fail to form character, when schools fail to build citizens, when workplaces fail to reward integrity, and when congregations fail to speak with moral courage, the police inherit all of that unfinished work at once, underfunded, undertrained, and overwhelmed by problems no academic course ever prepared them to solve. That is a reality. Yes, that is a reality. Now, Liberia's current effort to reform its police force toward greater professionalism and public trust deserves our support. And I mean that sincerely. And I would like to ask you to support the police too, in whatever capacity you can, whether that is advocacy, whether it's in prayer, or simply refusing to bribe your way past the next checkpoint you encounter. You could be a driver, you could be someone in the marketplace selling. Understand that no reform of the police, however sincere, can substitute for the reform of the institutions that were supposed to act long before anyone ever needed arresting in the first place. In other words, the police arrest and all of that we see going on should be the last resort. Do you see how this connects back to everything we said in the first half of this podcast? Laws restrain, but laws do not redeem. Leaders inherit habits from someone else before they get into that office. Now, where is that place that they inherit those habits? We said it starts from the building block of society, which is the family in the homes. It starts from in the church. It starts from in the workplace, in the schools. Wealth without conscience enriches just a few people. And now policing inherits the wreckage of everything we're talking about, standing at the very end of a very long chain of neglect, holding a weight that was never meant to be that police officers alone. And that is why rebuilding people is so important than just bad roads. So then the question is, what does Liberia actually need to recover? Ask that question out in almost any gathering, to the Hatai place or anywhere that people congregate or get together. Ask that question. What does Liberia actually need to recover to be a better country? And the answers that people gave you usually arrive as a list of infrastructure, paved roads, reliable power, modern hospitals, functioning airports and seaports. Yeah, people will say that. And even my own survey that I've done, even from afar, I speak to people all the time, video, I ask questions, people from all structure of our society. We need every one of those things. Reliable power, electricity. Every part of the country, yes, we need that. Modern hospitals, yes. For our ports to function well with the right security or security that's so firm to stop wrong or evil in its tracks, we need every one of those things. Let me be completely clear that nothing I am saying should be mistaken for indifference toward physical development for our country. No, I want the roads paved. But roads do not form honest drivers. Hospitals do not train compassionate staff on their own, no matter how modern that equipment inside of that hospital looks. Infrastructure amplifies whatever character already exists within the people who use it. Giving to a nation of an established conscience or formed conscience, infrastructure multiplies and brings about flourishing, viability, turning good roads into good commerce and good schools into good citizens. Giving to a nation still struggling with corruption and neglect, that same infrastructure simply multiplies the skill of what was already broken. Even a water road just lets the same bad habits travel faster on it. And this is deeper clean that we must look at. And this deeper clean underneath everything we've covered so far on this podcast. And I've been saying that over and over. Liberia's recovery must include rebuilding people, rebuilding family by family, classroom by classroom, workplace by workplace, congregation by congregation. That's a rebuilding process because institutions are only trustworthy as the consciences of the people who run them. And that is why if we look in the scripture, we see the popular teaching in Galatians chapter 6 that a person reaps what they sow, and that applies to nations just as surely as it applies to individuals, families sitting in the pew on Sunday morning. A country that invests only in structures while neglecting souls will eventually watch new buildings fill the same old habits with people with the same old habits, the same shortcuts, the same quiet betrayals of public trust that fill the old ones. You can have new walls, but there'll be old wounds. Our country's path forward runs through its people before it ever runs through its policies. However, good as those policies may be, and however long overdue they are, really goes back to the heart of the people, the conscience of the people. And so then, some of you may ask, well, our country needs healing from the heart. Of course. Yes. Where does that leave us? Sitting at the end of this podcast together. And I want to be honest with you about something. What we have covered on this podcast today is not an indictment written from me in a safe distance. And it is not the voice of a man who has stopped believing in Liberia's future. I want you to get that. Far from it. This is my pastoral, honest accounting of a nation that I love. And I'm offering everything that I say here with conviction that naming a wound of our country clearly, without flinching and without despair, which I believe is the first act of healing our country. You cannot bandage what you refuse to look at directly and in an honest way. And that is why I always show hope, instill hope, teach and preach hope in people. Because hope in any of our conversation is not a denial of the damage our country is facing. I just want you to hear that again because I wanted to stay with you longer enough than this podcast does. Hope is not a denial of the damage that we see going on in our country. It is a refusal to believe that damage is the last word. And here is a challenge to you before we go about the rest of the day here on this podcast. Stop asking only what the government should fix next. Start asking a harder, closer question. And what is the question? What conscience am I forming right now in my own household, in my own classroom, in my own workplace, in my own congregation? We should ask ourselves that because that separation between power and responsibility that we have spent this whole time tracing on this podcast, it did not start at a police station. It will not be repaired at a police station either. It started somewhere much closer in our home or in the home, in the conscience of a young republic or old republic, may I say, still learning who it wants to become. When would our country be repaired the same way it was broken? Well, we can do so quietly, patiently, one household at a time, one classroom at a time, one conscience at a time. That's a question to every one of us. So I want to say here, if today's conversation stirs something in you, I would love to hear about it. Like how many of you reach to me via my email or by going to gracioushopefellowship.com, as you can see on the screen down here in the scrolling section. Write me the same way and share this particular episode of the podcast with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been praying for our country, Liberia, keep praying. Prayer and patient labor together. They are not opposites, they are partners. Until next time, I'm your host, Alexander Red, reminding you that Gracious Hope Podcast is never a naive hope. It looks at the wound in the eyes of the people and still believes that our country, Liberia, will heal. Grace and peace to you all. And for all of those who made comments here, I appreciate that. Uh, for those who watch it and play, make comments here. Thank you so much for doing so. Let me place a comment here on the screen. And no help to the community or even the people. I think Abraham B. Colley is talking about our community that they are not receiving help. Um, and let's see here, just a few comments here for today. But if you're not watching this podcast live and you would like to watch it again, you can do so. But you can get our app on your phone as well. That's where you have previous episodes of the podcast that have been running for a very long time. You can go to the App Store and look for Gracious Hope Bible Fellowship, download the app, and you will find a whole lot of other things available there for you for spiritual growth and also for understanding our country better. The podcast, we got a whole section there on our podcast, and that'll help you pretty much get some other thoughts that we have been sharing on this podcast. Make your voice heard. Share this podcast with your friends, your families, and your loved one. And before we go here, I will also like to share with you here my book, and it's called A Nation's Soul. It's a new book that was just released. Why Liberia's Future Depends on Restoring its Moral Center. This book is available at malixpublishing.com. On the screen here, you can get a copy of this book at malixpublishing.com. It is also available on amazon.com as well. And yes, you can get a copy and hear my thoughts about how we need to search our hearts, and from the heart will flow the love for our country and the love for God and the love to keep the peace and stability. A Nation's Soul is available. You can get a copy right now for yourself. It's selling fast. A lot of people buying it. And I'm so glad for their support. You can also get us on YouTube. YouTube, go to YouTube, download the app, not the app, but a that's clip subscription. Okay, that's what I meant to say. Click the subscription is free on YouTube, and you can also get us on Facebook as well. Monday, not Monday, but Wednesday, we have our Bible study, and we continue our teaching series. Don't forget to join us at 6 p.m. That is 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Time. 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday. And that is our Bible teaching. We teach the Bible. Okay. Until then, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. My name is Pastor Red. I'll be back here again the same time. And don't forget to share our podcast. Until then, may you have a blessed day. Bye for now.